Have you ever walked away from a conversation where no one yelled at you, yet you felt utterly humiliated? Not because they said something wrong. They just interrupted right when you were opening up. They just laughed when you shared something you truly believed in. They just spoke over you as if you weren't even there. No noise was made. Yet inside, there was a stunned silence. A kind of confusion you couldn't quite name. A question that echoed in your mind. What did I do to deserve being treated this way? Disrespect doesn't always come through words. Sometimes it's in the way someone dismisses your presence as if asking to be treated like a human being is asking too much. In today's video, I won't offer shallow advice. Instead, I'll share 5 simple yet not easy principles to help you preserve your dignity among those who don't know how to respect it. Not through anger, but through an unshakable calm. 1. A gaze that doesn't speak, but no one can ignore. There are moments in life when you don't need to say anything more. No explanations, no raised voice, no counterattack, just presence. A presence not loud, but dense enough to bend the air around it. Still enough that others can't pretend you're not there. It's not the silence of fear, nor the humility of avoidance. It's the full presence of someone who knows exactly who they are and doesn't need the world's agreement to affirm it. When someone deliberately interrupts you, dismisses you with a contemptuous glance or a half-mocking comment, your instinct is to prove you're not weak. You want justice, a sharp reply. But in that moment, you can choose something even stronger to do nothing, not because you're too dull to respond, but because you've gone beyond the desire to be understood. And in that place, silence is no longer surrender, but a quiet assertion. I'm not playing this game. There are gazes that make others uneasy. Not because they threaten, but because they no longer waver. No fear, no pleading, no anger, only the cold clarity of someone who no longer waits for acceptance from the other side. That gaze exposes what the disrespectful try to hide, that their power exists only as long as you react. When you stop reacting, they lose the mirror they use to admire their dominance. And in that moment, they're forced to face their own emptiness. Stoic philosophy does not glorify enduring pain, it honors mastery through self-control. Silence, in the Stoic sense, is not withdrawal. It is full presence, untouched by emotional turbulence, free from egoic impulses. When you are silent, it's not because you're overpowered, it's because you've stepped outside the chaos, and from there, you begin to see the whole. The noisy never see the whole because they are ruled by the need to dominate, to win, to be heard. But you, when you are silent, you are in the clearest state a human can reach, the state where nothing is required to prove you deserve respect. I once sat in a meeting where every word I spoke was interrupted. Not aggressively, but subtly, as if my ideas were just a prelude to someone else's opinion. At first, I tried to push through. I tried to speak calmly, but the harder I tried, the more I was pushed out of the conversation until I stopped speaking. I didn't leave. I wasn't angry. I just sat there quietly and looked directly at the person who had cut me off, as if he were the only one speaking in an empty auditorium. And he began to stumble. His voice faltered. His eyes couldn't hold mine. He didn't know what had just happened, but the whole room did. The balance had shifted not through words, but through the full presence of someone who was no longer trying to be respected, but was simply respecting themselves. Some attacks don't come with shouting, but with smirks, backhanded comments, and dismissive looks. They're not loud, but enough to make you doubt yourself, enough to tempt you to react, to fight back, to step onto the chessboard that was set up to push you off balance. But what you don't see is this. The moment you react, You've stepped onto their board, and now every move you make will be used against you. The more you try to reason, the more they twist the narrative. The more you lose composure, the more they claim you're weak. And soon, you become part of a game they've programmed to keep you losing. A game rigged by rules that shift just enough to ensure you're always wrong. Stoicism doesn't teach us to win every confrontation. It teaches us to master ourselves to the point where we no longer feel the need to play with those who thrive on chaos. When you don't respond, when you don't play by their rules, you remove yourself from the board. You become a mirror, reflecting them not with vengeance, but in a way that leaves them nowhere to hide from their own smallness. They want you angry. They want you explaining. They want you defending, because each time you do, you affirm their influence over you. But when you are silent, when you stand there like a wall without words, they begin to see their own reflection in you, distorted and impossible to ignore. I once knew someone who always dropped comments that seemed accidental but somehow always targeted people's insecurities. He never seemed aggressive, but every interaction made the other person feel like they needed to defend themselves. I spent months wondering what I had done wrong. I wasted countless words trying to make the relationship more bearable. But the more I tried, the smaller I felt. Until one day, I stopped responding. I stopped explaining. I stopped pretending to laugh along. I simply looked through the eyes of someone who no longer felt anything for the old game. And suddenly, he went quiet. Not because I frightened him, but because he had nothing left to play off of. His subtle manipulation for the first time was met with no reaction and stopped like a machine out of fuel. What manipulators fear most isn't being attacked, it's being exposed. And the fastest way to expose them is not to participate. When you step outside and let them hear the emptiness in their own words. When you let them look at you and no longer see someone they can control, they are forced to look at themselves. And in that moment, they see the poverty of the power they thought they had. They realize that every ounce of control they held came from your willingness to respond. No reaction, no game, no false power. Only a person left to face their own emptiness. And you still standing, unshaken, neither winner nor loser, simply someone who's no longer being pulled in. And that is the purest victory, the victory of someone who chose to walk off the board just to preserve the clarity of their own mind. 2. When silence becomes a clear answer. Some questions aren't meant to seek truth. They're traps designed to force your reaction. They don't begin with goodwill, but with the intent to chip away at your inner calm. Some people don't ask to understand you, they ask to put you on trial, to make you explain yourself, to drag you into a game they've already rigged. And if you answer, you're not just giving information, you're giving them power. You're signaling that you need their approval to exist, that you're not strong enough to remain silent without agreement. But in truth, you owe no one a detailed map of your inner world. And you certainly don't owe anyone an explanation just so they can feel better about a choice they themselves never had the courage to make. The truth is, the world is not as kind as we hope. People will ask, "Why did you do that?" as if they truly care. But when you open up, when you try to share your reasons, your struggles, the turning points in your heart, you'll realize they're not really listening. They're waiting to argue. That question was never an invitation to dialogue. It was a test to see if you're confident enough to stay silent. Because in silence lies a kind of strength that words can never reach, a firmness that does not need to be understood to feel justified. I once lived through a moment like that. An old friend, during a chance encounter, looked at me and asked, "Why did you give everything up to live like this? Your old job, your familiar circle, the stability, don't you regret it?" The question sounded like concern, but was full of judgment. In the past, I would have explained everything. The internal reasons, the journey of self-discovery, the suffocation of living inauthentically. But that day, I just looked at him and gently said, "Because I wanted to." Then I said nothing more. No justification, no attempt to bring him into my world. Because I knew if he truly wanted to understand, he wouldn't have asked in a way that made me feel I had to defend myself. Don't be quick to think silence is avoidance. On the contrary, silence is how you affirm that you don't need anyone else to validate the path you're walking. You don't need to lay out every piece of yourself to be allowed to live authentically, and you certainly don't need to open your inner door every time someone knocks. Not everyone comes with good intentions. Not everyone who asks deserves an answer. Some questions are best answered with nothing at all. Not everyone is self-aware enough to recognize the noise they create in someone else's life. They speak, they joke, they manipulate, and still believe they're harmless. They hurt others with half-serious jabs and excuse it as just being honest or just having fun. But the danger of insensitivity disguised as playfulness is that it absolves people of responsibility for what they inflict. Only when they meet a wall of non-response do they begin to hear the echo of their own words and are forced to ask, "What did I really just say?" Silence, in that case, is not withdrawal. It's a mirror reflecting back the thoughtlessness and instability from the other side. When you don't argue, don't defend, don't explain, you leave them alone with their own words. No one to blame, no reaction to latch onto, no psychological game left to play. All they're left with is the residue of their own tone, and if they're sensitive enough, they'll begin to feel the emptiness in it. I remember once, in an important meeting, a colleague attacked me with a cold, condescending tone. In the past, I would have responded, but that day, I just looked at him, no reaction, no lowering my voice, no sign of offense, only a complete silence, as if I were giving him a safe space to hear himself. Because I knew, if I spoke, I'd become part of that wave of negativity. But by saying nothing, the room grew tense not because of me, but because he no longer had me as an excuse to justify his rage. In a strange way, silence slows time. It creates a pause in which projection can no longer continue. They can't keep throwing the ball at you. They begin to hear their own voice more clearly and often. For the first time, they realize it's not as noble as they believed. Nothing forces a person to confront their clumsiness and toxicity faster than a silence that isn't sarcastic, isn't challenging, just completely unresponsive. As if you've placed a period in the conversation without declaring it. Because sometimes, what changes people is not the lesson you try to teach, but the stunned silence that follows their own shameful words and your refusal to correct them. You let them see it, feel it, fix it. In a world where everyone wants the last word, you choose not to fight for it. You step back not because you lost, but because you already won in a place they're not yet mature enough to reach. 3. Not everyone deserves to hear your reasons. There's a kind of exhaustion that's hard to name, not from work, not from failure, but from constantly having to explain why you live the way you do. Each time you speak, you feel like you're defending what's right, holding firm to your beliefs. But soon, you'll realize you're no longer living, you're playing witness to your own life, and everyone feels entitled to cross-examine you like a defendant on trial. They ask why you turned away, why you chose the less secure path, why you didn't just try a little harder, why you dared to do what they never have. And they say these things with a face that looks concerned. But if you look closely, you'll see that concern isn't for you. It's for the panic they feel when they see you no longer playing by the rules they believed were safe. You're a mirror, and in that mirror, they see the courage they never had. The more you explain, the deeper you sink into the maze of others' expectations. You start softening your words, lowering your voice, adding rational excuses to avoid their discomfort. You learn to anticipate their reactions before you even speak. And each time, you take another step away from yourself. You no longer say what you truly believe. You present a version that's been softened, made more digestible, easier to accept. And in doing so, you lose something precious, your inner freedom. I've felt that before. When I left a stable job to pursue a path no one in my family understood, I spent months giving reasonable explanations. I cited inspiration, health, dreams, even numbers and potential. But after each conversation, I felt like I had just defended something that needed no defense. The more I spoke, the more they doubted. Not because my reasons were weak, but because they didn't want to be convinced. They didn't need reasons, they needed me to change. And at some point, I realized the only thing I needed to say was, because I chose to. Not out of defiance, not to provoke, but because sometimes the shortest answer is the only one that lets you remain whole. Freedom isn't found in justification or perfectly reasoned arguments. It lies in walking your path without carrying a sign that says, "Here's why." Those who understand don't need your words. Those who refuse to understand won't hear you, no matter how long you talk. The more you try, the deeper you fall into a game where the prize was never meant for you. Only when you stop playing can you rise and walk away intact. There is a kind of freedom that doesn't show itself with pride. It's not loud like victory, nor flashy like self-affirmation. It lives quietly, no banners, no declarations, no applause. It's the freedom that comes from no longer needing to explain, from no longer living as if you need permission to be yourself. And the clearest sign of that freedom is silence. Not the silence of resignation, but one that is strong enough to stand without a single justification. Silence, like a closed room where you no longer have to pull the curtain back for others to see in. You no longer arrange the furniture to suit someone else's gaze. Everything stays in its place, not cleaned up for visitors, but left as it truly is. In that space, you begin to actually live not under the burden of needing to be understood, agreed with, or validated. You need no approval, because you signed your name on your own life long ago. That silence, to many people, is unbearable. They cannot handle someone who doesn't need to be heard to feel valuable. They grow uneasy before someone who doesn't answer, doesn't explain, doesn't bow. But that unease doesn't come from you. It comes from their dependency on the reactions of others. You stop reacting, they lose their footing. And from there, they're forced to turn inward. I once sat through a long dinner in silence. Across from me was someone who had repeatedly dismissed the path I'd chosen. That day, they asked again, "Why do you live that way? Don't you think you're making life harder for yourself?" But this time, I didn't answer. I just looked, smiled gently, and picked up another bite of food. The question hung in the air, long, heavy, and unanswered. They waited for me to speak, as they had grown used to, but I said nothing. And from that moment, the one-sided conversation ended. Not because I won, but because I had stepped out of a game I never agreed to play. Silence is a boundary that needs no fence. It doesn't require you to announce, "I won't explain anymore." The very act of not responding is the clearest declaration. And strangely, when you hold your silence long enough, life becomes clearer. Those who once manipulated with questions begin to retreat. Those who love you sincerely stop demanding anything more. And you return to your most natural state, living without the need to explain, choosing without the need to be approved. No one can rule over you if you no longer need their recognition. No one can control you if you've stopped giving them reactions to manipulate. And no one can touch your core if you've made silence your final affirmation. I live this life in the way I choose. If you understand, good. If you don't, it's okay. In that silence, you are not diminished. You are stronger because you no longer need to say a single word to be fully yourself. 4. Distance is not to push away, but to see more clearly. When we stand too close to something, it often becomes blurry. Like pressing your eyes against a painting, all you see are scattered brushstrokes, disjointed colors, shadows that seem meaningless. But the moment you step back, the full picture begins to appear. And sometimes, truth doesn't reside where we look hardest, but in the space we're brave enough to create. I once believed that to understand someone, to maintain a relationship, to avoid being cold, we had to always be present, constantly close, connected, listening and caring without pause. But the closer I got, the more disoriented I became. The deeper I sank into attachment, the less I could distinguish between love and subtle control. Some people are only kind when you're within their sphere of influence. They call it care, but in truth, it's manipulation. They use the language of affection to impose expectations you're not allowed to refuse. And distance, the very thing I once avoided, became the place where I first saw the truth. When I began stepping back from certain conversations, when I stopped replying immediately to messages loaded with pressure, when I stayed silent in the face of judgment wrapped in affection, something strange began to happen. Those who once clung to me with warm words suddenly went quiet. No more check-ins, no real signs of care, no patience to wait. They vanished not because I did anything wrong, but because I no longer fed their invisible hunger to control someone else's emotions and time. Stepping back is not retreat, it's a deliberate act of clarity, like walking away from a chaotic crowd to get a full view, like muting the noise just to hear your own thoughts. Truth never thrives in chaos, it lives in space. And only when you're brave enough to create that space will the truth emerge calm, composed, needing no validation. When you step back, you begin to see who only stayed close when they needed something from you, and who stayed even when there was nothing left to gain. You start to tell the difference between genuine advice and veiled insults. You begin to realize that not all intimacy is connection. Some closeness is a trap of expectations and assigned roles. And most importantly, you begin to see yourself not as someone's version, not as someone trying to please, but as someone learning to stand still in independence and clarity. Stoicism never glorified cold detachment, but it always emphasized the need for mental space, a place where you can see things clearly, unclouded by emotion. Distance is that space, not to reject others, but to see clearly who is who, both them and yourself. You don't need drama. You don't need a final confrontation. You just need one step back and the truth will reveal itself on its own. Your life is a stage, not for display but for living, where you stumble, rise, grow, and learn to hear yourself amid the noise of the world. And like any stage, there will always be rows of seats close, far, crowded, or empty for those who witness that journey. But the tragedy is, many of us place the wrong people in the front row. We give someone an important seat in our lives, not because they deserve it, but because we haven't learned to distinguish between familiarity and kindness. We let those who judge us sit closer than those who quietly support us. We waste time explaining to those unwilling to understand, while forgetting the ones who only needed a glance to believe in us. And we keep doing it, nurturing the presence of those who shrink us, just because we fear they'll leave if we set boundaries. But what kind of presence is worth it if the price is doubting yourself. The truth is, not everyone deserves to witness your most fragile moments. Not everyone is worthy of sitting close when you're not yet strong, not yet successful, not yet sure of who you are. Because some people only know how to belittle you while you're laying the foundation. They don't see potential, they see what's missing. They don't come to cheer, they come to compare, to criticize, to pick apart what's incomplete, then turn their presence into a standard you're forced to chase. And you think that's care. But in truth, it's theft of your belief in yourself. Stoicism teaches that while you cannot control the behavior of others, you have complete control over who enters the innermost circle of your life. Distance, once again, is a tool. It hurts no one. It merely clarifies placement. Those who truly care about you will understand that some boundaries don't come from rejection, but from a deep need to live whole. And those who don't understand perhaps never truly respected you to begin with. Don't let kindness become an unlocked door. Don't let loyalty become your own trap. A relationship, regardless of label, friend, lover, family, has no right to sit in the front row if they constantly make you feel small in your own story. And don't force yourself to keep them there just because of a few warm memories. The front row belongs to those who inspire you, even through silent listening. To those who see your efforts, not just your flaws. To those who stay not because they need you to fill a role, but because they value you, no version, but the real you. You can't stop people from entering the theater of your life, but you can absolutely choose who sits close, who steps back, and who needs to be shown the door. That's not arrogance. That's the awareness of someone who knows their energy is limited and can't waste it trying to warm those who were never there when the cold came. Your life is a stage that needs no crowd, just the right people in the right seats, the ones who make you feel enough even when you have nothing, the ones who remind you, you don't need to be perfect. You only need to be honest with yourself, and that alone makes you worthy of sitting front row in someone else's life. And vice versa. 5. Holding your head high is a way to keep dignity without words. There are situations in life where words lose their weight. No matter how much you explain or justify, those who want to misunderstand will keep twisting your words to reinforce their contempt. And in the cramped space of surface-level relationships where pretense is called politeness, where subtle jabs are dressed up as humor, you come to a brutal truth. Your dignity isn't defined by what you say, but by how you stand when others try to push you down. When someone makes a cutting remark in front of a crowd, when they say something seemingly harmless but their eyes wait to see if you're hurt, most of us instinctively bow our heads, shrug, force a smile, or try to ease the discomfort with polite words. But you can't use a reed to block a storm, and you certainly can't use kindness to soothe deliberate disrespect. The only thing you can do, sometimes, is to keep your posture. Don't back away, don't flinch, don't explain, don't correct. Let your body become the answer, silent yet impossible to ignore. Wisdom isn't just knowing when to speak, it's knowing how to stand. Like a stone in the middle of a raging current, it doesn't need to shout to affirm its existence. Its stillness is already a statement. I once sat in a meeting where a woman was indirectly mocked for her opinion. She didn't respond. She didn't bow her head. She just sat upright, eyes calmly fixed on the speaker, radiating a stillness that unsettled everyone. It wasn't arrogance, it was a kind of unshakable presence. The room fell silent after a few seconds, as if everyone realized the game had just ended. No one laughed anymore, and the mocker suddenly seemed to be speaking too much. In that moment, I understood something. Sometimes, holding your posture is all it takes. Your presence becomes your voice. When you hold your head high, it's not arrogance. It's the refusal to bow to someone else's standards, and that makes them uncomfortable. Subtle manipulators use words to draw you into a game they control. But when you stay grounded, refuse to enter their arena, you not only disrupt their strategy, you shatter their illusion of power. They realize they can't shape you with words, and your composed silence leaves them exposed in the very game they built. Epictetus once said, "It's not others who insult you, it's you who permits yourself to feel insulted." Holding your posture is the first act of rejecting that permission. When you stand tall, without bowing, without justifying, without asking for permission to exist, you no longer need words to protect yourself. You don't lower yourself to explain. You don't shrink to be accepted. You stand, and that is enough. Those who look down on you often need no clear reason. Sometimes they don't hate you for what you did wrong. They resent you for refusing to shrink. They're disturbed by an inner calm they can't shake. They're irritated by a confidence you don't even have to announce. And what unsettles them most isn't your reaction, it's your lack of one. They wait for a crack, a sign that you too crave validation, but you don't. And in that silence, they lose the footing they once used to pull you into a game they always expected to win. True confidence doesn't seek to be the hero in someone else's story. It doesn't need to prove itself right, doesn't need to reclaim fragments of reputation from people who only live through comparison. Confidence is not walking into every battle head held high, it's knowing which battles aren't worth stepping into. When you're grounded within, you don't need to fight over every word. You just stand there, silent, steady, and your presence alone shakes the one who tried to provoke you. There's a type of person who always seeks a reaction. They speak with sarcasm to see if you'll get angry. They ask unnecessary questions to watch you squirm. They throw condescending looks like calculated tests. But when you don't react, when you remain calm, when you give them none of what they seek, they're left with nothing to latch on to. Like someone trying to push open a door locked from the inside, all they hear is the echo of their own voice, and sometimes that silence forces them to face what they've long been avoiding, the emptiness within themselves. Marcus Aurelius once wrote, "True strength is keeping your soul still amid unseen waves." Confidence without display is the purest form of that strength. When you no longer need anyone to confirm who you are, when others' contempt no longer touches your core self-respect, their words dissolve into nothing. The one who disrespects you waits for a reaction to legitimize their behavior. But when you don't react, they're left with only their own pettiness unreceived, unreturned, unrespected. Confidence is not a roar. It's a steady breath in a chaotic room. It's a calm gaze in the face of insult. It's the unshaken presence when the world hopes you'll tremble. And that unyielding steadiness is a place the disrespectful cannot reach, cannot touch, cannot occupy. They step back not because you attacked, but because they have nowhere left to stand. In the end, what makes a person untouchable is not armor on the outside, but freedom on the inside. The one who keeps silent with confidence is not weak. They've outgrown the need to strike back, to engage in mind games, to conquer others. And in that moment, they don't need to win because they never joined the fight. They just stand there, calm as stone in the face of the wind, and let the world adjust itself around their unwavering presence. I once mistook silence for weakness. I thought that if I didn't speak up, I would be disrespected, but then I realized silence isn't the absence of reaction, it's a different kind of response, deeper, sharper, and harder to manipulate. There are people who don't seek truth, they seek control. Every explanation you give only makes them step back to come at you from another angle. And the more you speak, the more they listen not to understand, but to find your weaknesses. I've learned to hold back my words, to conserve my energy, to reserve my respect for myself. When you stop trying to be understood, you free yourself from the burden of being judged. You're not cold, you're awake. Not indifferent, you're grounded. Freedom doesn't come from others' approval, but from the moment you stop giving them the power to decide your worth. And sometimes, the strongest thing you can do is say nothing at all. If what I've shared today resonates with you in any way, please like, subscribe, and turn on the notification bell so you won't miss the next steps on this journey I've created just for you. Because every time you choose to stay silent at the right moment, maintain distance from the right people, and stop explaining yourself to those who never listen, you quietly raise the standard for your own life. And eventually, the world will begin to adjust to the way you treat yourself. I'll see you in the next video.